thank you all for being here. I'm very honored to speak to you all today. This life, there are moments which mark your life, and time is divided into two parts, before this and after this. BC and AC, before cancer and after cancer. I can hardly remember what my life was like before cancer. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to go back to that time of carelessness and lack of direction. What has cancer given me? Passion, compassion, motivation, and empathy. Let's go back to the morning of December 19th, 2006. As I was waking up from a surgical biopsy, my surgeon asked my parents to join him in a consult room. As my mom walked in, she noticed a box of tissues. Immediately, she knew that he had bad news. My mom later said that the presence of or lack of tissues in consult rooms and exam rooms became a sign of either good or bad news. After delivering the news to my parents, he walked back to recovery, where I was slowly waking, still feeling groggy and nauseated. He looked at me with glassy eyes and he told me the news. You have breast cancer. You see, it took my team of doctors 6 weeks to diagnose me with breast cancer. Why? I was only 24. I was too young for breast cancer. Strangely enough, when I received the news, I felt some comfort and peace in that I would get to the other end of this journey. Maybe it was just because I was really medicated. But what the journey would look like or how I would persevere through it was a completely different story. After my surgical biopsy results came back from the pathologist, I was told that I would need a partial mastectomy, a few rounds of adriamycin, Taxol, and Cytoxan, and I would also be on an intravenous drug, Herceptin, for a year following chemotherapy. I would endure 36 rounds of radiation. Simple enough, right? Will I lose my hair? Yes. Will I throw up for weeks and weeks? No. Would I be able to continue my job at a public accounting firm during the busiest season of the year? Yes. Well, then let's get this started. And let's get it started now so that I can get it all over with. New Year's Eve 2006, just 2 weeks after my diagnosis, my dad and the rest of my family toasted me. Here's to Rebecca in 2008. Yes, 2008, because we all knew 2007 was going to be a hell of a year. January 19th, 2007, I began my first dose of adriamycin. My treatment, almost 2 weeks and 2 days later, my hair began falling out. In February, my mom and my best friend Tina accompanied me to the Young Survivors Conference in DC. I met young women just like me and you from all over the country. And as inspiring and igniting as that conference was, it was also one of the lowest points in my treatment journey. I had become so sick from my third round of treatment that I could barely walk or eat or even think. Looking back now, I realized that I hadn't really faced my diagnosis and my treatment until then. Between what was going on with my body and my mind, I began doubting my ability to get through it. I even considered stopping treatment. I told my mother and my best friend that I just couldn't do it anymore and that I needed a break. But thanks to the encouragement of my friends and my family and my oncologist, I kept going. I finished my last round of chemotherapy in May of 2007 with my families and friends surrounding me in infusion therapy. Radiation was a bit more tolerable on my body than chemotherapy, and it was over before I even thought much about it. I think I complained more about it interfering with summer vacations than I did about the burns on my chest. My Herceptin treatments were pretty much the same. I actually looked forward to those Friday nights or those Friday afternoons away from the office being pampered by my infusion nurse, Jennifer. March of 2008, I finished my final round of Herceptin, but what was next I was not at all prepared for. Since my diagnosis, this was the day I was waiting for. This was the light at the end of the tunnel. This is what we toasted to on New Year's Eve 2006. But instead of relief, I felt afraid of what my future held. I hesitated to make long-term or short-term plans. My sense of future was forever changed. My friends and coworkers expected me to go back to normal, back to the same Rebecca BC, before cancer. But the reality of it was, I didn't know at that time, was that I would just never go back to that life. As I transitioned from a cancer patient to a cancer survivor, I really began to process all that I had been through in the years prior, 2 years prior. I was on a mission during treatment. My mission, to survive. So now what? I made it through the worst part. When can I go back to being me again? I struggled with my identity. I overanalyzed all my relationships and friendships and questioned my purpose in life. Most would argue that that's just a natural process of being in your 20s. But it was deeper than that for me, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't go back to normal and move on. I became very critical of myself. Lack of energy left me frustrated and angry. I couldn't, and still can't sometimes, forgive myself for being forgetful and absent-minded. I waited and waited to feel like me again. I became even more disparaging of myself because I should have been grateful that it was over, that I had made it through treatment relatively unscathed and had a great prognosis. I should be embracing life. Instead, I was angry that I had been robbed of being a carefree young adult. While friends and peers were spending late nights at bars and concerts, I had spent 2 years bald and in sweatpants. And even though those days were behind me, I still felt a sense of urgency in everything I did, which made me even more tired. It was almost like I was in a hurry to finish any project or task, because God forbid, what if I die in the middle of it and it's left undone? A bit melodramatic, I know. And I wasn't afraid of dying necessarily. I was just afraid that I was not going to have enough time to figure out who I'm supposed to be and what my place is in this world. Sometime during my chemotherapy, I began getting involved with the local breast cancer organization, Susan G. Komen. While I was going through treatment, volunteering and advocating for breast cancer research soon became a passion. My mom would probably tell you that I dove into the cancer fighting community a little bit too early. And while I thought I was doing something good for others, in reality, I was just trying to make sense of my own suffering. My fight against cancer continued well after I finished treatment. I was finally taking control and facing my feelings of helplessness. My fight also began the process of me healing. And then it eventually became about reaching out and giving back, paying it forward in gratitude of the support I received during and after treatment. Over the years, I've met too many women that weren't as lucky as me. And that was something that I just couldn't move on from. Some of those women were diagnosed late because they didn't have access to care. Some were the most fearless advocates that I'd ever known that had access to all the resources in the world, but even those resources couldn't save them. I sought comfort in other survivors. I became close friends with a few women that were diagnosed under the age of 30 in the Birmingham area. And one particular survivor who became my mentor and like a second mother in some aspects. Beverly was in her 50s when I met her. She was originally diagnosed with breast cancer in her 30s. Time after time, I would come to her with questions about coping, fear, and settling into a normal life. Beverly was a fearless research and patient advocate, and she introduced me to opportunities locally and nationally to advocate for breast cancer patients and researchers. We traveled the country together, attending research conferences. She taught me so much about making an impact by partnering with researchers on groundbreaking research that could change the trajectory of care for women in the future. An impact on the lives of women in our community, the lives of nearly 230 women that are diagnosed every year with breast cancer, and the millions of women that are living with it today. For Beverly, her fight was for her children and her grandchildren. She was tireless in her fight, and we lost her in November of 2014. This journey of survivorship has been one filled with ups and downs. And though we can't control everything that happens to us, we can decide not to be reduced by them. I'll celebrate my 9-year anniversary of my diagnosis in December, and I've never looked forward to my future more than I do now. I am not perfect. I struggle with trying to do it all and having balance in my life. I am impatient and stubborn, which may translate well as an advocate, but doesn't translate as well in everyday life. I battle the same issues that most 30-somethings do, whether it's profession or love and relationships or family. The only difference is I have to be a bit more conscious of what's going on in my body because I need this thing to last me another 50 years. I did not want cancer to define me, but lately I've learned it would shape and mold me into the perfectly imperfect person that I am. It taught me life lessons about friendships, relationships, family, and balance that I may not have learned until years or years later. Cancer didn't change my life 8 years ago, but the people I met because of cancer did. People like Beverly. Other survivors I've met along this journey inspire me. The men and women who volunteer for this cause because they've had a family member or a friend diagnosed with this disease inspire me. My friends and coworkers and family who rallied around me inspire me. And my fiance, who takes me as I am and supports my passion for this cause, inspires me. Our future is bright. We have all so much life to live, no matter where we are in this journey, and we have to live it and embrace it with reckless abandon. Maya Angelou once said, "My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style." Thank you.